Hello and welcome to Sip Sip Hooray, the podcast for people who want to uncork more information about their favorite beverage and the interesting people involved in making wine. On the pod today, cork has been used for centuries to seal wine bottles. As you may know, it's made from the bark of the cork tree, and most of it comes from Portugal, 60% of the world's cork, in fact. We are excited to be joined today by Carlos de Jesus, Marketing Director and Communications Director at Amorim Cork in Portugal. In fact, Carlos is joining us from Portugal today to talk about new progress in the world of wine corks. That's right, an advanced manufacturing technique that promises to keep cork taint from infecting your wine. So quick, uncork something delicious, and we'll go ahead and get started. We are the two Marys who like to eat, drink, and be merry. I'm Mary Babbitt.
And I'm Mary Orlin, and I'm a cork dork. This past summer, in August and September of 2023, my husband and I took a long vacation to Portugal. Well, wouldn't you know it, being in Portugal, I had to do a little work. So we were very fortunate to get to visit with the folks from Amorim Cork, including our guest today, Carlos. And we had a 2-day in-depth masterclass in cork. And I tell you what, we were totally fascinated. And it was like, I was so excited, like, I've got to come home, tell our listeners on Sip Sip Hooray about everything that's going on in the world of cork and just bring awareness, because I don't know how much you think about the cork when you pull it out of the bottle, but there's a lot that goes into getting that cork there in the first place. So when I was in Portugal, we visited two of Amorim's facilities. One is a facility where all the cork bark planks go when they're first harvested from the cork oak forest. The second one is where all that cork is taken to be processed into corks. And that facility blew my mind. It runs 24/7, producing millions of cork a day, over 6 billion a year. And it covers about 20 football fields in size, and that's American football, not soccer or football. But it's just really incredible. And then we also learned about the effort that went into dealing with an issue that was a problem as little as 20 years ago, where 3 to 5% of all wines sealed with a cork stopper were infected with this bacteria called TCA, 2,4,6-trichloroanisole. And it would make your wine taste like wet newspaper, wet dog, or just smell terrible. And you would think, oh, what's wrong with it? But you didn't know what. But thanks to the efforts of Amorim researchers, they were the first major cork production company to figure out how to eliminate TCA. They figured out where it's coming from, the source, and all that. So not to get too geeky or technical, but we'll get into a little bit of that with Carlos and talk about cork's comeback. So Carlos, welcome to Sip Sip Hooray.
Thank you for the invitation. Thanks for the kind words, and hello, everyone.
Hello. We're really glad you're here. And, we start off by saying cork is not a new thing. It's been around for a long time. Do you have any idea how long it's been used in the world of wine?
Well, the oldest archaeological records that indicate the utilization of cork stretch back to ancient Egypt. But it is with the Roman Empire that wine and cork starts coming together, not yet in a bottle like we would know it today. For that, we have to wait until the 1600s, when people in a little-known wine region called Champagne had an idea of bringing together glass, wine, and cork, and in the process creating almost a trinity of elements that today resonates with people everywhere around the world. That's quite an accomplishment, but not quite the accomplishment, especially if you compare it with the fact that cork forests exist in this planet for 40 to 45 million years. So if you look at that as our factory of raw material that Mary was referring to, that's about as old as it could get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, That's amazing. And these cork oak farms or forests, you'll find them in Portugal, France, Italy. Um, but one thing I thought was really interesting is that your company, Amorim, does not own cork forests. You contract with growers, and some of these are multi-generational families who've been the caretakers of these cork tree forests. I think that's really interesting and really plays into the whole economy in Portugal.
Yes, that was true for 151 years of the 153 years that Amorim exists as a company. We actually have recently changed that. We have made a large investment of 60 million euros, about 62, $63 million, to change what has been the standard practice, which is to, and we still do, and we'll still continue to acquire our raw material from thousands and thousands of property owners, small property owners, very large, everything in between, because these are trees that are part of a native species that belongs to the Western Mediterranean basin. We said they have been around for millions and millions of years, and this is where they belong. When you have native species that are very, very competitive, you are cutting a big chance of having a lot of environmental and social problems that derive from the fact that seldom these native species are more profitable than invasive species. Mm-hmm. Most of the time planted in a monoculture, intensive way. So here from the get-go, you have a story that is completely different from what we are used to, starting with the fact that these long-living cork oaks, they can live 200 to 150 years or more, are never cut down. So really, when you start putting all of these pieces together, you begin to see that, wait a minute, there is something definitely special about this.
Well, I think that's really interesting that in order to harvest the bark, you don't have to cut down the tree. I think so many of us are used to products made from trees requiring that the tree is cut down and, in many cases, a new tree is planted, but the clear cutting of forests, as we know, have created all sorts of environmental havoc around the world. So it's pretty cool that harvesting bark is a process that doesn't require that you lose the tree in the process. So how is it, like you take a patch of it? How does it work?
It's a little bit like shearing a sheep or peeling a banana. If you think of the banana itself as the trunk of the tree and the skin of the banana that you peeled out as the cork that comes out, you have a pretty good idea of what it would visually look like. But I don't think that manages to capture the impacts that you have when you walk into these forests, and there are 2.2 million hectares, something like almost 4 billion acres here that we are talking about.
Wow.
When you walk into these forests and you see trees that are orange, because that's the color of the tree trunk once you harvest that bark. So if you imagine, you would ask imagine you are a science fiction author and you need someone to illustrate what the forest would look like in another planet. And the person can say, well, yeah, now we can make them orange. And your reaction probably would be, well, that's a bit of a stretch. Yeah. That's exactly what they are. And in addition to that, when you witness the harvesting, the very expertly handled sharp axes that are able to very precisely pry the cork out of the trunk without ever damaging the tree. When you walk into those forests and you see that, and then you close your eyes, and you are listening to the same sounds that the Romans heard 2,000 years ago, because that's how you harvest it. After that, everything is very, very modern. But that magical moment is really that. It is a magical moment.
So that harvesting doesn't permanently damage the tree, stripping the bark. Does it grow back? I mean, do you leave a big scar on the tree? Okay. Wow.
It grows back.
And I think this might be a good time to talk about the life cycle of a cork oak tree. And
It's a long one.
it is a long one.
Long
And
one.
you know, in the wine industry, people know if they plant a vineyard, it's going to be at least 3 to 5 years before you really get a good first harvest, right? But in the cork industry, with cork trees, it could be up to 43 years before you really get.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. To give you an idea to our listeners, you are not allowed to touch a cork oak. The cork oak is about 25 years old.
Okay.
That gives you the first harvest. Okay, so the first shearing of that sheet. But that cork is not high quality cork yet. So you can make perhaps a little bit of insulation, but that's about it. By law, you cannot go back to that tree until minimum, at least 9 years have gone by. Second harvest still does not give you cork good enough to make the cork stoppers that go to the wines that we'll dream about tasting sometime in our life, someday in our life. So it's only after 43 years, like you said, 25 plus 9 plus 9, that this tree matured. And if you think of it from an asset management point of view, if you are one of those property owners, that's how long they have to wait for that asset to start yielding something. So if I approach any of our listeners and say, you know what, I have a great business idea for you. You're going to literally and figuratively dig a hole in the ground, pour a lot of investment into that, then you're going to sit back and wait 43 years to start seeing something interesting. Well, that would be a short meeting.
Yeah, it's a non-starter.
But because it's going to sound like a crazy idea, yet we are benefiting and the world is benefiting from those quote unquote crazy ideas that someone made and had 80, 90, 100 years ago. So in a nutshell, sustainability needs a long-term view, because sustainability, of course, it's about reduction of CO2, and we have great news to share with everybody that drinks wine when it comes to that. But the fact is that even if you could, for some miracle, resolve the CO2 problem today, tomorrow the world would still wake up with a huge sustainability problem. So when we want to be serious about addressing the issues of sustainability, yes, we have to deal with CO2. We also need to add with where are those well-paid agricultural jobs coming from? Harvesting cork is the best paid agricultural job I ever found. It's 160 euros a day.
Wow.
During 3 months, before some of you decide to move to the south of Portugal, it happens during 3 months. But the rest of the year, they will not be making that much money on a daily basis. Of course not. But imagine, because it's easy to find 3, 4 people from the same family doing this. And to make the math easier on all of us, imagine even just 100 euros a day, multiplied by 3 or 4 people, multiplied by 3 months. This is going to give that family a powerful injection of cash that is going to do what? It's going to fix that family to that land.
Right, right.
Every city in the world has too many people, and all the countryside in the world does not have enough people. So again, another factor that from the get-go sets Cork apart.
Yeah, and there's a saying, I remember you telling me about the generations. If you plant a tree for yourself, can you tell us that?
It's a saying in the south of Portugal, where most of the cork forests are located, that basically what it's saying is that you want to make money for yourself, you plant an eucalyptus. You want to make money for your children, you plant a pine tree. But if you want to make money for your grandchildren, you plant a cork oak. And Mary, coming from, Wall Street and the fast-pacing life of New York and all of that, you're right here, come back to Portugal and say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And all of a sudden it hits you like, wait a minute, these guys are right. They're onto something. Mm-hmm. And if you add on top of that ability to free ourselves from that short-term dictatorship of the quarterly results, that sometimes is good, but it's not always good. And you start looking at different ways of doing things, and you see the connection with wine. Because let me tell you a couple more things when it comes to sustainability and cork. The cork forests are part of one of the 36 hotspots of biodiversity around the world. Now, we're not just talking about biodiversity that looks great on our Instagram feed. Yes, the beautiful northern Indian tiger, that's important. That's sustainability and biodiversity. But guess what? That ugly little beetle that lives on the soil, That's part of biodiversity. Don't want it in your Instagram account, but without that kind of biodiversity, you don't have quality and healthy soils. You don't have wine. Hey, forget it about wine. You don't have food, period. So that's an important issue. And also, it's a massive barrier against desertification and forest fire. And you don't need to live in California to know how important that is. So
Yeah.
what does wine have to do with all this amazing story we've been discussing? Very simple. 73% of the value added created for those core property owners comes from stopper. The rest can come from things that range from footwear, aerospace, and defense applications. Yes, that's great. But 73% of that value added still comes from wine and other types of stoppers. So next time you buy a bottle of wine that has a cork stopper in it, know this: you are making a demonstrable, clear, quantifiable contribution to sustain one of the great sustainability stories. In fact, what I believe is one of the templates for what businesses need to be like in the 21st century.
I love that. That's a great way to look at it. But I think it's important that we talk about how in the wine world, corks suddenly got a bad name. I don't know if we go back, is it 20 years ago? But people started thinking like, hey, do we need something other than cork to seal up our wine bottles?
And that's when screw caps started coming into the picture big time.
Yeah,
and
rubber
plastic corks and some of those horrible options. But yeah, so because I remember 23, we started, Mary and I used to do a TV show together, and that we started it about 23 years ago. And I remember tasting several bottles of corked wines on a frequent basis. Mm-hmm. And then, but now I can't remember the last time I've had a wine that was corked or had cork taint. And we should explain what cork taint is and how a consumer might perceive it. And then how, Carlos, did you all figure out the puzzle and a way to say you eliminated cork taint?
Yeah. So yeah, what is cork taint?
Okay, so you're basically asking me to concentrate $350 million of investment and 20 years of research into something.
Into three quick, neat sentences.
Exactly, yeah.
10 seconds, go.
No pressure.
No pressure, right? No, but seriously though, it's as complicated an issue as that name that you pronounced a while ago, 2,4,6 trichloroanisole, because that's what it is. Well, first of all, it's an innocuous element. So trichloroanisole is omnipresent. You can find it in cork, you can find it in tap water, you can find it in barrels, wood, carton, fruits. So it's really something that it's essentially a byproduct of environmental contamination, heavy industrial pollution that affects some microorganisms in a way that they have to defend themselves. Things like penicillium, trichoderma, like tiny little life forms that when confronted with some chlorophenolics, transform that into a chloroanisole. That for human noses has a particular impact because we are able to detect that even at nanograms or parts per trillion. Okay, so depending on the time of the day, the type of wine, how familiar you are with the wine and with the problem itself, but even at 4 or 5 nanograms, 4 or 5 parts per trillion, and I know it's difficult to wrap our minds around that tiny little quantity, but even at minute quantities, you can open that bottle and like you described, you can smell like a wet carpet or something that your nose recognizes not. But now, again, cork has an affinity with TCA, which is short for that molecule that we were talking about, but it's not the only carrier. But for a long time, we thought that it was the only source of it. In fact, for a long time, we thought there was only one type of anisole. Now we know there are many other types of anisole. But the wine industry has a problem. So look at, we cannot have an element of packaging potentially ruining our wine. Even if that's just 1 or 2 or 3% of the time, it's still too much.
Yeah.
So please do something. But what in doing so, they were laying a challenge at our feet that was really, really complicated to solve because on one hand, this industry was saying, okay, you start doing quality control in parts per trillion, and again, nanogram.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I want you to continue producing, industrially producing corks in the billions of units per year. Okay? So
So
imagine
keep making it, but fix it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is like bridging, two opposite sides of the galaxy. It's not a low task to do, and a lot of people did not think it could be done. To be honest with you,
I'm sure.
Sitting on the outside, when you look at the distance that goes from a universe where you measure things in parts per trillion to an industrial universe where we do things in the billions. Yes, it may be difficult to imagine that someone could bridge that. So a lot of people start hedging their bets, and hence the screw caps and the dreadful plastic, single-use plastic stoppers and all that came. But you know what? Part of it was because the problem was a difficult problem. We didn't know anything about it. The first scientific paper on the problem was published in the 80s, late 80s. So it was a relatively recent thing 20 years ago. And how do you deal with that from a quality control point of view? Required, all those millions of dollars that I was talking about and all those years. But the good news is that it has been defeated. And it has been defeated. A while ago, I said that everything changed from the moment of the harvesting. Well, if you reach the end of that rationale, you have what you saw here, Mary Orlin, when you visited us. Machines that are so sophisticated that they can pick up half of a nanogram, cork by cork, in seconds.
Yeah.
Now, that is equivalent of finding one drop of water. You guys imagining an Olympic-sized swimming pool, right? Now imagine finding a drop of water, half of a nanogram, in 800 of those Olympic-sized swimming pools in seconds.
Wow.
With a reliability such that we can go to our customer and say, you know what, problem solved. And then on top of that, we had things like, thermal desorption pods and supercritical reactors. It's really, I think, a merge of nature and technology, of science and art, that whenever humans are able to do that, it creates some of the strongest proposition that we can think of in history. When those two worlds come together, well, that is core to that. We don't forget where we're coming from, but we know very well where we want to be.
So you feel like you've solved the whole cork taint issue?
Well, it's not us feeling that, of course, we're going to think that we did. It's how the proof is in the pudding. And in this case, the proof is in your working table when you guys open the bottle and whether you're going to see it or not. What happened since the first steps were taken? Well, Amorim back then, when the screw caps and the plastics came onto the scene, we made about 2.5 billion corks. Today, as Mary said before, we made last year 6.1 billion corks. So we more than doubled the size of it. So I think we need to go back and thank the plastics and the screw caps for that proverbial kick in the pants. That, to be honest with you, probably the industry needed, because if you have a market share that ranges somewhere between 96-98%, well, your propensity to listen does not go up, does it?
And yeah, I think it's interesting. And people were thinking that screw caps were the answer. And turns out people are starting to turn away from screw caps now.
It's funny you mentioned that, because there was in the UK today, in a couple of wine trade magazines, came up a headline that said a very large bottling company is after 15 years putting back their corking machines into action. Now, the UK is, in a great many ways, it's the paradigm for screw caps, or it has been paradigm for a long time. But what you see today is, especially because of the power that the UK retail chains have, 87% of the wine sold in the UK is estimated to be sold through supermarkets. So you're basically talking about 4 or 5, 6 people maybe that are responsible for making decisions that could affect millions and millions and millions of bottles. Let's face it. But even that, you see things change because screw caps, people realize today, and surprise, surprise, are not perfect. So all of this was happening at the time that the problem curve for cork was going down, while the problem curve for the artificial stoppers was going up. And then, you can bring on the sustainability aspect, you can bring on the understanding that we have today, how much more valued by consumers that trinity of glass, cork, and wine is, and you reach three very strong bases for additional growth.
Well, I think that one of the things we didn't say at the beginning was that the reason cork is so beloved in wine as a wine stopper is because it allows the wine to slowly breathe and kind of soften tannins in a way that's really difficult to get with a different kind of stopper. The gentle breathability of a wine cork.
Absolutely. And we need to also ask the question is that, if cork was always good enough for the most expensive and prestigious wines in the world, those that we common mortals normally don't have access to. So, but if it was good for the very best, why wouldn't it be good for the wine that I have at home, with my wife on Tuesday night? Mm-hmm. So that question was never really answered, neither by the plastic or the screw caps, it's not to say. And part of it goes exactly to what you just described, which is what is called the oxygen transfer rate that different closures affect. Now, we've known for a few hundred years that any given chemical reaction, especially ongoing complex chemical reactions like wine or us, humans, if you fiddle around with the amount of oxygen that gets into that any given chemical reaction, ongoing chemical reaction, you're going to have different end results. This has been science for a long, long time. And I know a lot of people sometimes think it's better to ignore science, but not really. So, and a lot of people seem to forget that. And because closures, our understanding today is completely different, because now we know that cork is the choice of closure is the very last analogical decision that it's made. And of course, we always heard what you just described. With cork, wine can breathe. Yes, it can, but we didn't even know how that breathing was taking place. Is the breathing done like a scuba diver that carries a tank on the back? And is it a snorkel that goes? We didn't know. Yeah. Well, it turns out that it is like a scuba diver. It does carry its own amount of oxygen because each cork, on average, and next time you pull a cork out of a bottle, think about this. Not only that cork can easily have 100 to 150 years of growth and care behind, even in the humblest of the wines with the humblest of the cork. But each one of those corks also packs, on average, about 800 million cells packed into it. It's a tiny little space. 800 million cells that each one of them has a little bit of oxygen inside, but each one of them also has an incredibly powerful elastic membrane. What this means is when you compress it at the bottling line, a lot of that air is going to be pushed outside of the bottle, but a lot of it's going to be squeezed into the bottle. And then in fractions of seconds, those 800 million cells immediately expand back or try to expand back to its original size. And guess what? It's going to be pushing against the walls of the glass. And that's where part of that magic is.
Yeah, it's the aging gracefully, which we all want to do, right?
Our age for all of us, isn't it?
Well, also,
you know what? Sorry, I don't want to suggest that anyone should start chewing on cork, but not at all. But cork comes from a note, just like barrels come from a note. And what we get out of that, you get phenolics. And phenolics are powerful antioxidants.
Ah, yeah, the phenol.
Right? So there you have it.
Wow. And I was also interested in the fact that, corks, we can recycle the corks that we pull out of our wine bottles. Screw caps, I was under the impression that they got recycled, and every time I threw them into my recycle bin. But you informed me that, because of the plastic disc that's in the top of the screw cap on the inside, that can't be recycled. And so unless you dig it out, it's
Well,
really, it's not going to be recycled. And I have to tell you, I tried to dig some of those out and I just couldn't do it.
yeah. Well, part of the problem what you're describing is that people think that something is recyclable, and
Hmm.
they assume that immediately that it's recycled because it
Right.
is recyclable. Well,
Right.
they're very two different things, unfortunately. But even when you recycle plastic, I saw some research not long ago that generated microplastics when you recycle. So obviously the answer is less plastic if possible. And don't get me wrong, plastic, there's a role for plastic in many parts of our life, but single-use plastic,
Hmm.
like the liner on the screw cap that you described, because let's face it, the aluminium is not the closure. The aluminium is a delivery mechanism to that plastic liner, which is what keeps wine inside. And
Right.
single-use plastic stopper or plastic, plastic in the shape of a cork, not really cork, try to look
Yeah.
like it, try to mimic a great compliment to us, but it's not the real thing. So all of that adds up to a little bit of incoherence often,
Sure.
and you have to imagine that we cannot be all happy and proud that in the front of the supermarket we are doing away with single-use plastic bags, and then in the back of the same supermarket we could well be replacing, natural cork with single-use plastic stopper.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point. Absolutely.
Makes no sense. But fortunately, cork, the exports of cork are outpacing the growth in wine consumption. So,
Mm.
which means that we are gaining market share back again after 15 years or so, like those headlines in the UK today, they heralded. We are gaining market share mainly from plastic plugs, but increasingly a little bit from screw cap bottles.
So you guys, your manufacturing is in Porto, Portugal. Am I correct there? That's where you guys do the and how does it work where let's say California wineries contract with you and then you ship them a bunch of cork? What's that process like?
We have a network of subsidiaries in every single major wine market,
Okay.
which makes very unique. I mean, our competitors don't have that. What it means is that if the winemaker has a question or a complaint or a compliment, it doesn't matter. He or she can make that directly to us. So we have an immediate access to what they need, how they need it, when they need it. So the corks are produced up here in Porto. They are shipped as semi-finished goods, and they will arrive, for example, in California or in France or in Spain or in Chile, it doesn't matter, to be finished and then put on the bottling line, and it's eventually inside that bottle for the next 6 months or the next 6 decades.
Right. So one thing I'd like to talk about is, so we've been talking about the natural cork stoppers, and these are the ones that are punched out of the bark of the cork, of what's called the plank, in either by hand or by machine. I saw both. The guys who do it by hand work very, very quickly, and it's amazing to see that process. But you also make other types of corks, and there's a difference between a cork for a wine bottle, a natural cork, a cork for a sparkling wine or champagne bottle, and then the corks for maybe,
Spirit.
less expensive wines where they used more of a granulated or
Oh yeah, the composite.
composite.
Like, yeah.
So could you kind of walk us through the different types of corks you are producing for wine bottles?
Let's take a step back first. So we have three main families of cork stoppers, if you will. Still wine, like you said, sparkling and champagne, but also spirits. And by the way, also for beer, you think of some of the best beers out there. Ironically, a lot of them made by monks in places like Holland and Belgium, just like the monks in Champagne. So there's a lot of interesting historical facts
Yeah,
here.
that's true.
Maybe for
Yeah.
another one of these conversations. But quite remarkable. I mean, from World War II to science to the space exploration, cork really has had a big role in all of that.
Hmm.
But when you look at the types of cork, so spirits is also a very important growing aspect of it. But concentrating on wine now, so you have still wine and sparkling wine, and the wines that are carved as a single piece from the bark of the tree, like you were describing, those are the best ones. They tend to go to the best wines. The wines that need to age longer in bottle, they can be absolute masterpieces of nature. Now, you wrap technology around that gift of nature, like I was describing, and that's a good way actually to describe what we do today. You know, we have this amazing natural, NASA calls it the nature's own polymer. So we grab that and then we wrap technology to make it even better. And you created either that type of stopper or let's call it reconstituted stoppers made out of granules that in our case are the byproduct of the production of natural cork. So not all wine is going to be, 10 years in a bottle or 100 years in a bottle or 3 years in a bottle. So we need to be able to give the kind of quality that the world came to expect from those very high-end natural cork stoppers, but at price points that make sense for a bottle that does not cost $300, but costs, well, in Europe it can be $3, in the US it's difficult to find anything at $3. But it is absolutely imperative that we have a different type of cork for every different price point, but also crucially a different cork for different types of wine. Mm-hmm. Now, we all dream of situations where one size fits all. That's great, but let's face it, it seldom happens in reality. Mm-hmm. So if you have one type of cork that you tell everybody that, it doesn't matter if it's a €3 bottle of wine from the south of Portugal or a $300 Cabernet from California, it's all great and merry, it all stays in the same. It doesn't happen in any other single industry that I can think of. Mm-hmm. Or difficult to happen in a complex product like wine. So it doesn't happen like that. But the crucial thing here is to make sure that all of them have the same performance, impeccable performance when it comes to the sensory aspects of it, knowing that what you have in a €300 bottle of wine is not going to be exactly what you're going to have in a €10 bottle of wine. Sure, but when you buy a car, some cars have a V8 engine under its hood, some don't.
Right, so, or the leather seats or the regular.
So like the English say, different horses for different courses. And the important thing here is to make sure that you deliver that quality as the winemaker intended, and all of them with the negative carbon footprint. And that's something that I think it's important to underline. We discussed briefly CO2 before, but every single one of the wine or champagne stoppers or sparkling wine stoppers that we produce has a negative carbon footprint.
Mary mentioned that even the dust is utilized with the dust created when manufacturing the cork or processing the cork. You utilize the dust in some way.
Yeah, I was impressed that nothing in the manufacturing process of cork is wasted.
Absolutely nothing. You harvest 1 pound of cork, you'll be using 1 pound of cork. So I mentioned a while ago other types of applications. It could be flooring, it could be footwear, it could be heavy construction, it could be gaskets for the oil industry, could be thermal protection for spacecraft. All of this is essentially created with the byproducts of other products. But you reach a point where those granules are going to be so fine that not much more can be done with it. Well, hold on. Yes, a lot can still be done with it because 67% of our energy needs comes from, guess what? Zero emission cork dust. So the more we produce, the more this amazing, 100% renewable, 100% natural energy, zero emission biomass is going to be created. So when you think about circular economy, I think very few companies embody that concept better than Amorim. And you talked about recycling a little while ago. That's the next big challenge. We have recycling programs in the US, we have recycling programs in France, in Portugal, in Spain, in South Africa, in Italy, you know. But if I tell you that we have recycled hundreds and hundreds of millions of stoppers, that sounds good. Well, in fact, Amorim alone makes 25, 26 million stoppers a day. So we are at the beginning, but as the wise man once says, every big journey starts with a small step. We have started taking those steps, but clearly go even further. And there are some very interesting plans in the US that hopefully during this year will pan out. And I think will make it easier for everybody to recycle those parts. Especially if you think when you touch it, it feels different. So people, and we look into this, people don't like to throw, they don't feel well when they just, chuck it into the bin and that's it, and off you go. No, we can do much better, knowing, of course, that if the most problematic thing ever to arrive on the landfill is the cork stopper, we know the world will be okay.
Well, I always figure that they're compostable, that I could put it in the compost bin because it's a natural product.
It is, but remember also one thing. It's a product that may have to be inside the bottle for 60 years or more, or 70 or 100. Not long ago, people were fishing champagne bottles from the bottom of the Baltic Sea that were 200 years old. Guess what?
So it didn't really come.
Yeah.
Unbelievable story.
Yeah.
So I've had Madeira wine from the 18th century, 1780 something, that had a cork that was virtually intact. So compostable, especially in the US, where you have these strict rules about it, means that there is a certain rapid rate of degradation of that product. Now, if it was that fast to degrade that fast, you wouldn't be able to use it in bottle.
That's
you degrade your wine.
What they are is 100% natural, 100% renewable, 100% recyclable. Yes, absolutely. You put it in your compost, it's going to be there for a long time. But can I suggest something? Use that as mulch, because it's one of the best mulch that you can think of. You have a wood chipper, just put your cork in there and then spray that over whatever flower pots or garden, whatever it is that you have. Just use that as mulch.
Well, that's a good tip. I like that.
Yeah. And when corks are recycled, now, I don't know if people are aware of this, but it doesn't go back into another wine bottle. It gets the corks, I believe this is correct. They get ground up for other industry applications. Is that correct?
Correct. The only thing we cannot do with recycled cork is another cork. But we can make any of the applications that we make. I mean, today we're not able to establish the percentage of the thermal protection applications that we sell to the aerospace industry in the US that comes from recycled cork. But a little bit of it may have been in your hand and is now in space. That could very well happen.
That's cool.
Story. But one of my favorite recycling stories, it's a hotel chain, a European hotel chain, that puts recycling bins in their properties that have a restaurant or a bar, and they start recycling corks. They send the corks back to us. We grind them, we make them into flooring, and whenever they have to renew a hotel room or a whole hotel, they buy the cork flooring from us that will have a part of the cork they recycle. So
that's cool. What hotel is that? What chain is that?
It's called NH.
NH. Oh yeah, I'm familiar. Oh, that's really cool. Neat.
Well, gosh, I have learned so much. I have one quick question for you that I wonder if you had a tip for me. Occasionally, and I don't know if it's a storage issue I have, but sometimes you get a wine bottle where the cork is starting to disintegrate. Is that because I'm not storing my wine correctly, or is there anything I can do to prevent that? Where the cork kind of crumbles as you open the bottle?
Right. There's so many factors that could contribute to that, from a poorly produced cork to a poorly chosen cork by the winery. But a lot of the times it has to do with the storage condition.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, a lot of us either don't have the space or don't have the means to have a proper cellar with the right humidity. I mean, let's face it, the real world, and I mean, especially if you live in a city where space is at a premium, that is not going to happen. But storage condition is a big determinant of the longevity of both the wine and the cork. So the suggestion: keep it in a cool, dry, not too dry, not too wet either, but the right amount of humidity away from the light, because you talk about problems in wine caused by cork, but there are a lot of other problems in wine that can be caused by other things, and one of them, for example, is light struck. So please don't, as proud as you may be of your wine collection, don't leave them on the windowsill. Right. That is not going to help, neither the cork nor the wine.
No,
for sure. So Carlos, looking ahead, what can we expect from Amorim in terms of more advances in cork or new products? What can you tell us to look out for?
Well, when your survival as an industry and as a company is fundamentally rooted on science and on research and development. Organizations almost get addicted to R&D and innovation. So in Amorim, I think very much so that is the case. So we continue to better understand. I alluded to the fact that cork comes from a barrel, for example. So we need to better understand what those phenolics, what that interaction is with the wine. So we know it's not immediate, but there's a lot more that you keep seeing coming from Amorim, and I think it's absolutely fundamental that we keep pushing the scientific envelope without ever forgetting that we have one of nature's great gifts in our hand, and be respectful of that. Again, this is a company that's been around for over 150 years. I'm pretty sure it will be around for another 150, because guess what? Cork is not just the leader when it comes to closing wine. There are roughly every 7 out of every 10 bottles closed every year around the world have a cork stopper in it. That's quite remarkable for a solution that has been around for a long time, right? So there got to be something to it. Of course, it's a quality that matters, sustainability, value added. But you know what? Cork is also a great sustainability story that demonstrates that while difficult, it does not have to be an utopia to balance people, planet, and profit. Because guess what? If you're not able to do this, if you're not able to balance these three famous P's of the 21st century, the people, the planet, and profit, the environmental, the social, and the economic issues, we're going to hit a very hard wall. I don't know when, but eventually we will. And cork does that. Cork demonstrates that whenever someone said, well, you know, that's good for hippies and tree huggers, but we always have to sacrifice either economic issues or social issues or environmental issues. I can raise my hand, and anyone buying a bottle of cork in America today with the cork in it can rate, and there are millions and millions, actually billions of these stoppers that are open every year in the United States. Any one of us can raise our hand and say, excuse me, there is one place in the world where that balance exists. And if there is one place in the world, hey, maybe there are two places in the world. But in the process, I think we can and we have to debunk that fallacy that it is only hippies and tree huggers can possibly expect to balance people, planet, and profit. I would defend that our future depends a lot in finding this kind of templates, this kind of model. So if you can give another great reason for someone to make or open or write about it or talk about it, a bottle of wine with a cork on top of it, great.
Yep. Not to mention the satisfaction of that pop. I mean, that cork pop.
Now you're talking about my favorite sound. You and I, we discussed this at lunch. I think because what happened, Mary, is that we were discussing something that we're not yet very good at leveraging. But think of this. You cannot, but imagine you could run a poll around the world and ask every human, regardless of age, gender, but whatever. So tell me, what do you think are the 5 happy sounds of humankind?
Laughter.
Music.
Music.
Yeah, the laughter of a baby, maybe the break of a wave. But I bet that pop
Cork pop.
to be
Yeah,
one of them. And
Yeah,
you know what?
it's Pavlovian. You hear it and
it
like, ooh,
is. It's the universal. Let's celebrate. Let's have fun.
Right.
something good's
But
coming.
Yep.
but when you see some beverage companies spending so much money, dozens of millions of dollars to create a specialist at the moment of consumption,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have this sound that is recognized and recognizable anywhere in the world you go, from Chile to China. And it's this universal carrier of good news, of a good moment.
Yeah.
And you have this embedded in your own packaging, and then you are surprised that Cork still seals 7 out of every 10 bottles in the world. Maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Thinking about
Yeah.
that. And at the moment where the world, God knows that we need more things to bring us together, and how bad we need those. Here you have something that it's recognizable. I can be talking to someone on the other side of the world that I've never met, but that pop is going to resonate positively with me as with this other person that is on the other side of the world that has completely different views of the world than I do.
Totally. It's universal.
Absolutely. It makes me want to go out and pop a few corks right now.
Well, I hate that
it's a little early in California, but
no, not like someone says. It's some 5 p.m. somewhere around the world. Well,
exactly.
Right?
It was
6 p.m. So
6 p.m. So I'm all set.
Well, I hate to put a stopper on our conversation, but we need to. I've had such a good time talking with you. And I really feel like you are someone who loves their job and knows what you're talking about, Carlos. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And just like, there's so many reasons to love Cork, from the history, the sustainability, the biodiversity, and the quality of the products. So thanks for educating us on the benefits and the great things about Cork.
Yeah, I think our listeners will look at Cork very differently in a very positive way from now on. And I'll become Cork dorks.
Cork dork.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, for having me. Thanks, Mary Orlin, for being here and getting firsthand. And Mary Babbitt, I hope soon, you'll have the chance also to pop in. And any of your listeners, I mean, if you are on our side of the world, please let us know. We don't have a tourism division or a core tourism brand, but we certainly welcome every wine lover that is in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So terrific. Thank you again.
Thank you. I highly recommend it.
All right, Carlos de Jesus, cheers to you, and sip, sip, hooray.
Sip, sip, hooray. Cheers.
Sip, sip, hooray.
Well, Mary Babbitt, I'm so glad that we have been able to introduce our listeners to the world of Cork and go for an in-depth master class, not too technical.
Yeah, absolutely. I had never thought of Cork from a sustainability standpoint, or Cork versus a screw cap, because I have enjoyed the ease of screw caps.
Who hasn't?
But if the cork taint problem is solved and it's a better product that helps your wine age better, why wouldn't we all go back to cork?
And it's so much better for the environment, and that whole the
these
CO2.
trees there's like magical trees. The cork
trees. They are magical trees. They really are. And the recyclability and just everything just really makes you think, we need to do our part, pull more natural corks out of wine.
It's something small. It's a small way we can make a difference.
Yeah, right. But anyway, well, thanks everyone for listening. I hope, you will look at a cork very differently next time you open a bottle. And we so appreciate you for listening. You can check out the show notes from today. I'll post some photos and videos from my visits to Amorim in Portugal, and that's at sipsiphooray.podcast.com.
And we also encourage you to like and share our podcast. Give us any feedback you might have, or any ideas for a future podcast you'd like us to take on. And you can always find us at sipsiphooray.podcast.com. And of course, we're on social media as well, Instagram and Facebook.
And we also have a Substack. So if you go to our Substack, podcast. You can sign up for our announcements when our episodes drop, so you won't miss a thing. You can also see all of our previous episodes. Those are also on our website. And subscribe and become part of our family.
Yeah, we'd love that. All right. Well, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you again next time for another great conversation. Until then, Mary Orlin, cheers to you, girl.
Cheers to you, Mary Babbitt.
Sip, sip, hooray.